During Easter brunch, my daughter-in-law raised her glass and calmly announced they had already divided everything I owned, as if I were no longer sitting at the table. My son didn't correct her. He kept cutting his ham like it was any other Sunday. I remember the exact moment because I was reaching for the salt shaker shaped like a little ceramic lamb, the one I bought years ago at a church fundraiser in Hartford, and my hand stopped halfway in the air. The dining room looked exactly the way I had planned it. Soft yellow tulips in a glass vase, pastel napkins folded just so, my late husband's silverware polished until it reflected the morning light coming through the bay window. I had woken up at 6 to put the ham in the oven, basted it twice, and even warmed the plates because that's how Robert always liked it. 72 years old, and I still believe that if I set the table right, people would treat it with respect. "We thought it would be easier this way," Rebecca said, her voice smooth, controlled, the same tone she used when explaining something to a bank teller or a contractor. She didn't look at me when she said it. She looked around the table, at my niece, at Daniel, at the printed folders sitting neatly beside each plate. That was when I noticed them. Cream-colored folders, identical, each one placed where a guest's fork should have been. Daniel finally spoke, but he didn't turn toward me. "Mom, it's just planning ahead," he said, like he was asking me to pass the gravy. I set the salt shaker down carefully, exactly where it had been, and wiped my fingers on the cloth napkin in my lap. My coffee had gone cold. I took a sip anyway. "Planning what, exactly?" I asked. My voice came out steady, which surprised even me. Rebecca smiled then, a small, practiced smile. She opened the folder in front of her and tapped the top page. "The house, your accounts, the investments. We've mapped everything out so there won't be confusion later." Across the table, my niece shifted in her chair, glancing between us. Someone cleared their throat. Outside, I could hear a neighbor's lawn mower starting up, the low hum drifting in through the open window, like nothing unusual was happening at all. I reached for my fork, cut a small piece of ham, and placed it in my mouth. It tasted exactly as it should, sweet, tender, perfectly cooked. "And when did this conversation happen?" I asked. This time, I looked directly at Daniel. He hesitated just for a second, then shrugged. "Over the past few months. A few months. I felt that settle somewhere deep, not as a sharp pain, but as something colder, more precise. Over the past few months, while I was writing checks for property taxes, while I was sorting through Robert's old paperwork in the study, while I was trusting that my home was still mine." Rebecca slid one of the folders slightly toward me. "You should take a look," she said. I didn't reach for it. Not yet. Instead, I glanced down the table again at the identical folders in front of everyone else, already opened, already being read. That was when a quiet thought formed, so clear it almost felt like someone else had said it out loud. This wasn't a conversation they had started today. This was something they had been building piece by piece long before Easter morning. And somehow, everyone at my table seemed to know about it, except me. Rebecca's folder stayed exactly where she had nudged it, resting halfway between us like it already belonged to me. I did not touch it. Instead, I reached for the glass pitcher of orange juice and refilled my cup, steady, careful, the way you do when you're buying yourself a few seconds to think. The ice clinked softly, and no one spoke until Daniel cleared his throat again. "Mom, you should at least look at it," he said, still not quite meeting my eyes. I glanced down the table. My niece had already opened hers, her fingers hovering over the pages like she was not sure whether she should keep reading or pretend she had not. Across from her, my sister Ruth adjusted her glasses and leaned closer to the document in front of her, her lips pressed into a thin line. That was new. Ruth never involved herself in anything that looked like conflict. I finally reached forward and pulled the folder toward me. The paper felt heavier than it should have, like it carried more than ink. On the first page, in clean, printed font, were the words Preliminary Estate Allocation Plan, Carter Family. My name was centered underneath, as if I had approved it. I flipped the page. The house was listed first. Address, square footage, estimated market value, based on a recent appraisal. $325,000. I had not requested any appraisal. Underneath that, there was a line, primary residence to be listed for sale within 90 days. I paused there, my thumb resting on the edge of the paper. 90 days. I looked up slowly. Who ordered an appraisal on my house? I asked. Rebecca did not hesitate. We did, she said. We needed accurate numbers. Needed. I let that word settle. You needed. I repeated, quieter this time. Daniel shifted in his chair, the legs scraping lightly against the hardwood floor. Mom, it is just information. It does not mean anything has changed. I turned the page again. My checking account was listed next, along with a balance that was accurate to the dollar. Then my investment account, the one Robert and I had built over 30 years. There were even notes about liquidation strategy and tax efficiency. Specific language. Professional language. Not something you put together over a casual conversation. Where did you get these numbers? I asked, keeping my voice even. Rebecca folded her hands on the table, her posture straight, composed. Daniel has access, she said. That was not entirely true. Daniel had limited access years ago, for emergencies, and even that required my approval for anything beyond viewing. I looked at him again, and this time he did not look away fast enough. There was something there. Not guilt exactly. Something more calculated, like he was waiting to see how far this would go. From the far end of the table, Ruth spoke up, her voice tentative. Helen, I thought you had already agreed to this arrangement. The room shifted then, just slightly but enough. I felt it in the way everyone avoided my eyes at once. Agreed to what? I asked. No one answered right away. Rebecca tilted her head, as if she were surprised by my question. We discussed it at Christmas, she said. You said you wanted things to be simple. Christmas. I replayed that night in my mind, the tree still up, the smell of pine and cinnamon, Daniel talking about how complicated estates could get. I had said something about not wanting to burden anyone someday. That was not an agreement. That was a passing comment. I closed the folder gently and rested my hand on top of it. Simple does not mean silent, I said. My voice was still calm, but now it carried something sharper underneath. Rebecca held my gaze this time. No one is trying to go behind your back, she said. The sentence landed wrong, not because of what it said, but because of how quickly she said it. Too ready, too practiced. I let a small pause stretch across the table, just long enough for discomfort to settle in. Then I asked, so, if nothing has been decided, why does everyone here already have a copy? That was when I saw it. Just for a fraction of a second, Rebecca's expression shifted, and Daniel's hand tightened around his fork. And in that moment, I realized this was not the beginning of their plan. It was the part where they thought it was already finished. I did not open the folder again right away. Instead, I folded my hands over it and looked down the table, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make everyone aware of it. That kind of silence used to belong to Robert. When something did not sit right, he would pause like that, not raising his voice, just letting the weight of the moment settle until people corrected themselves. I never thought I would be the one using it. At Christmas, I said slowly, I remember talking about not wanting paperwork to become a burden someday. I did not remember agreeing to sell my house in 90 days. Rebecca shifted slightly in her chair, crossing one leg over the other. No one said sell immediately, she replied, though the document in front of me said exactly that. Daniel finally looked at me, really looked this time. Mom, you know the upkeep is a lot, he said. The roof, the taxes, the yard. We are just trying to make sure you are taken care of. Taken care of. I glanced toward the kitchen doorway where the calendar still hung on the wall, the one with handwritten notes in blue ink. Last week I had scheduled a gutter cleaning. 2 days before that, I had paid the quarterly property tax bill online, just under $4,000. Everything was current. Everything was handled. I've been taking care of this house for 34 years, I said, including the last 3 on my own. My voice did not rise, but it carried. Daniel opened his mouth as if to respond, then closed it again. That hesitation told me more than anything he could have said. I turned back to the folder and flipped to the next page. There was a section labeled Projected Transition Timeline. Bullet points. June, list property. July, relocate Helen Carter to assisted living or alternative housing. I stopped there. The word relocate sat on the page like it belonged to someone else's life. You have already looked into where I would go, I said. This time it was not a question. Rebecca leaned forward slightly, her tone softening just enough to sound reasonable. We toured a few places, she said, just to have options. There's a community about 15 minutes from here. They have a fitness center, group dinners, transportation. You would not be alone. I almost smiled at that. Not because it was comforting, but because it was so neatly packaged. I'm not alone now, I said. Across the table, my niece lowered her eyes. Ruth cleared her throat again and reached for her water glass. No one rushed to agree with Rebecca this time. That was new. I could feel it, the smallest shift in the room, like a draft coming through a closed window. Daniel, I said, keeping my eyes on him. Did you sign anything on my behalf? The question landed differently. It was no longer about opinions or planning. It was about action. He straightened in his chair. No, he said quickly. Too quickly. Rebecca's hand moved toward his, resting lightly on the table between them. A small gesture, but deliberate. No one signed anything, she added. This is just preparation. Preparation that included appraisals, account balances, and relocation timelines. Preparation that had already been shared with everyone at my table. I closed the folder again, more firmly this time, and slid it back to the center of my place setting. My fork rested beside it, untouched now. Then let me ask this another way, I said. Who else have you shown this to? Daniel hesitated again. Rebecca answered. Just family, she said. But as she spoke, I noticed something I had not seen before. In the bottom corner of the page, beneath the printed header, there was a small logo. Not a home printer mark, a professional letterhead. I leaned in slightly, just enough to read it clearly. It was the name of a local real estate brokerage, one I recognized from signs posted around town. That was not family. That was business. I sat back slowly, my fingers resting on the edge of the table. And for the first time since this began, I felt something sharper than surprise. You did not just talk about this, I said quietly. You involved people outside this house. Rebecca did not answer right away. Daniel looked at her, not at me. And in that brief exchange between them, I saw it clearly. This had already moved beyond conversation. The only question left was how far they had gone without me. I did not respond to Rebecca right away. Instead, I reached for the folder again, this time with purpose, and turned it so the bottom corner faced me fully. The brokerage logo was clear now. Evergreen Realty Group, printed in dark green ink with a phone number beneath it. I recognized it immediately. Their signs had been popping up on front lawns all over our neighborhood in the past year, especially on homes that sold quickly. I slid the page out from the folder, holding it between my fingers as if it might change if I looked at it long enough. You contacted a realtor, I said, my voice steady but sharper now. Rebecca exhaled lightly, almost like she had been expecting this moment. We just had a preliminary conversation, she replied. Nothing official. I tilted the page slightly, scanning the fine print beneath the logo. There it was. A date. March 12th. 3 weeks ago. This says they completed a comparative market analysis, I said, tapping the paper once with my index finger. That is not a casual conversation. That is a service. Daniel shifted again, this time pushing his plate slightly away as if he had lost his appetite. Mom, it is standard, he said. People do this all the time before making decisions. I looked up at him, holding his gaze. People do it with their own property, I said. The room went quiet again, but it was a different kind of silence now. Less uncertain, more exposed. I placed the paper flat on the table so everyone could see it clearly. The numbers were typed in neat columns. Estimated sale price, suggested. Listing range, projected time on market. Someone had taken the time to walk through my house, measure it, evaluate it, and write it all down. Who let them in? I asked. That question landed heavier than the others. Rebecca's posture tightened just slightly, her shoulders pulling back. Daniel looked at her again, and this time she did not answer immediately. That hesitation was all I needed. Daniel, I said, more firmly now, did you give someone access to my house? He rubbed the back of his neck, a habit he had carried since he was a teenager whenever he knew he had crossed the line. I used the spare key, he admitted. It was just one visit. You were at your doctor's appointment that morning. I felt something shift inside me then, not a sharp break, but a quiet realignment. The timeline clicked into place. 3 weeks ago, that Tuesday morning, I had been gone for just under 2 hours. Long enough for someone to walk through every room, open closets, take notes, maybe even pictures. "You let a stranger walk through my home without telling me," I said. This time, my voice did not stay as soft. It did not need to. Rebecca leaned forward, her tone firm, controlled, almost managerial. "It was not a stranger," she said. "It was a licensed professional, and we were there the whole time." "We." I let that word settle. "You and Daniel," I said. She nodded once. Across the table, Ruth set her glass down a little harder than before. My niece closed her folder completely, pushing it away as if she no longer wanted to be part of what was unfolding. That was another shift. Small but real. I straightened in my chair, no longer leaning back, no longer observing from a distance. "You walked through every room," I said, more as a statement than a question. Daniel hesitated again, then nodded. "We had to assess the condition," he said. Assess. Another professional word, chosen carefully, as if this were a transaction and not a home where he had grown up. I glanced toward the hallway that led to the bedrooms, picturing the closed doors, the dresser in my room, the drawer where I kept documents Robert had organized years ago. A thought surfaced, precise and unwelcome. If they had access to the house, they had access to more than just square footage. I turned back to the table slowly. "While you were assessing," I said, "did you go into my study?" Rebecca's expression did not change, but Daniel's did. Just enough. His eyes flickered for a fraction of a second before settling again. That was answer enough. I placed both hands flat on the table, feeling the smooth wood beneath my palms, grounding myself in something solid. "Because if you did," I continued, my voice lower now, but far more controlled, "then this is no longer about planning. This is about what you have already taken." Rebecca's fingers tightened slightly around her glass, and Daniel did not speak. And in that silence, I realized the appraisal was not the first step they had taken. It was simply the first one I had discovered. Daniel did not answer my question about the study, and that silence lingered just long enough for Rebecca to step in. She reached into her own folder and pulled out another sheet, sliding it across the table toward me with deliberate care. "Before this turns into something unnecessary," she said, her voice still calm but firmer now, "you should see the full picture." I looked down. This was not part of the earlier packet. The paper was different, thicker, with a faint watermark I recognized from legal stationery. At the top, in bold letters, it read, "Authorization for Financial Review." My name was printed beneath it, and there, at the bottom, was a signature. My signature. I felt my fingers tighten slightly against the edge of the table. The ink was mine. The shape of the letters was unmistakable. "You remember this," Rebecca continued, her tone softening just enough to sound reassuring. "You signed it when you were recovering from a flu. Daniel brought it by, so we could help organize things." I did remember being sick. Fever, fatigue, the kind that makes even simple decisions feel heavier than they should. Daniel had stopped by with soup from that diner on Maple Street, the one Robert used to like. He had mentioned something about paperwork, about making things easier if anything ever happened. I had signed without reading closely. At the time, it felt like trusting my own son. Now I studied the document more carefully. The language was precise. It granted permission to review, access, and consolidate financial information for planning purposes. Planning again. Always that word. "This does not give you the right to act on anything," I said, lifting my eyes back to them. Rebecca did not flinch. "It gives us enough to move forward responsibly," she replied. Daniel leaned in slightly, his voice lower now, almost persuasive. "Mom, we are not trying to take anything from you. We're trying to prevent problems later. Taxes, legal issues, confusion. You always said you did not want us dealing with a mess." I held his gaze for a long moment. "A mess is something you clean up after it happens," I said. "This feels like you were deciding it has already happened." That landed. I could see it in the way his shoulders stiffened, in the way Rebecca's hand returned to the table, fingers lightly tapping once against the surface before going still again. But she did not retreat. If anything, she leaned in further. "Helen," she said, using my first name now, something she rarely did. The reality is that the house is too much for you long term. The market is strong right now. If we wait, you could lose value. We're trying to protect what you built. Protect. Another careful word. I glanced again at the appraisal, at the timeline, at the authorization form with my signature sitting neatly at the bottom like a quiet endorsement of everything I had just heard. The pieces were aligning, but not in the way they intended. This was not just a plan. It was a structure. Documents, access, outside professionals, a timeline already in motion. I slid the authorization form back across the table, not pushing it away, just returning it to its place. You said nothing has been decided. I said evenly. And yet you have an appraisal, a realtor, and access to my accounts. Daniel opened his mouth again, but this time Rebecca spoke first. We also spoke with a financial advisor, she said. He recommended consolidating some of your accounts to simplify things before the sale. That was new. I felt it immediately. Not just planning a sale, but preparing the money that would come after. Which advisor? I asked. Rebecca hesitated, just briefly, then answered. A firm in Stanford. Daniel can give you the details. Daniel did not jump in this time. He sat back slightly, his hand resting on the table, but no longer holding his fork. That small withdrawal told me something had shifted, even for him. I leaned back in my chair as well, but for a different reason. Not retreating, measuring. I would like those details, I said. My voice was calm again, but now it carried intention. Rebecca nodded, though her expression had tightened just enough to show this was not the direction she expected. Around the table, no one had touched their food in several minutes. The ham had gone untouched, the coffee cooling in cups that no one lifted anymore. I rested my hands lightly in my lap, feeling the fabric of the napkin beneath my fingers, grounding myself again. Then I looked back at the authorization form one more time. The date was there, printed clearly. And beneath it, in smaller text I had not noticed before, was a clause referencing associated documentation. I focused on that phrase, reading it again, slower this time. Associated documentation. That meant there was more. More than this form. More than the appraisal. More than what they had placed in front of me today. I lifted my eyes back to Rebecca and Daniel. And for the first time since this began, I did not feel like I was catching up. I felt like I was starting to see the edges of something much larger. I think, I said quietly, you should show me everything you have gathered so far. Rebecca held my gaze, her expression unreadable for a moment too long. And in that pause, I understood something clearly. They had not brought everything to this table today. I did not push them any further at that table. Not yet. Instead, I nodded once, as if their explanation had satisfied me, and reached for my coffee again. It had gone completely cold, but I took a slow sip anyway. All right, I said, setting the cup down carefully. We can go through everything later. No need to rush this today. The shift was immediate, even if no one said it out loud. Rebecca leaned back slightly, her shoulders relaxing just a fraction. Daniel let out a breath I had not realized he was holding. Around the table, the tension loosened just enough for forks to move again, for someone to reach for the breadbasket, for conversation to attempt to restart in small, careful pieces. That was fine. Let them believe this moment had passed. I picked up my fork and cut another piece of ham, chewing slowly, listening more than speaking. My niece asked something about work, Ruth commented on the weather, and Rebecca responded with polite ease, as if the last 20 minutes had been nothing more than a minor misunderstanding. But I was watching now, listening differently. When you know something is wrong, the details stop blending together. They start standing apart. We should probably connect you with the advisor this week, Rebecca said casually after a few minutes, turning back toward me. He has openings on Thursday morning. I nodded again, just as calmly. Send me his information, I replied. I will take a look. Daniel glanced at her, then back at me. It will make things smoother if we all go together, he added. That way everyone is on the same page. Everyone. I let that word pass without comment, but I noted it. This was not just about helping me anymore. This was about managing something they already saw as shared. We will see, I said. Not yes. Not no. Just enough to keep the rhythm steady. Rebecca gave a small smile, satisfied for now, and reached for her glass again. The conversation drifted once more but I'd already stepped out of it in my mind. I was thinking about the study, about the drawer in the bottom right of the desk, the one Robert had insisted we use for anything important. Not because it was hidden, but because it was consistent. If something ever happens, he used to say, you should always know exactly where to look. I had kept that habit. Tax returns, property deed, copies of the trust documents, all in that same place. If Daniel had gone into that room during the appraisal visit, even for a few minutes, it would not have taken much to open that drawer. To take a quick look, to take a picture. I set my napkin beside my plate and stood up, smoothing the front of my blouse as I did. I'm going to check on the pie, I said, gesturing toward the kitchen. No one questioned it. Why would they? That was exactly where I would go in any other Easter brunch. I walked down the short hallway, past the framed photos on the wall, Daniel at 8 years old holding a baseball glove, Robert smiling beside me at our 40th anniversary dinner, and into the kitchen. The air still smelled faintly of cinnamon and sugar. The pie sat on the counter, untouched. I did not go to it right away. Instead, I reached for my phone, which I had left near the sink earlier that morning. My hands were steady as I unlocked it and scrolled through my contacts. There was a name I had not needed to call in a long time. Mark Ellison, Robert's attorney, the one who had handled everything when Robert passed. I tapped his name, then paused for just a second before hitting the call button. The phone rang twice before going to voicemail. I did not leave a message. Not yet. Instead, I ended the call and opened a new text. Mark, this is Helen Carter. I need to review my documents as soon as possible. Please call me today. I read it once, then sent it. The message went through immediately. I slipped the phone back onto the counter just as I heard footsteps behind me. Rebecca's voice followed a moment later, light but intentional. Everything all right in here? She asked. I turned, reaching for the pie server this time, lifting it from the drawer, as if that had been my only purpose all along. Everything is fine, I said, meeting her eyes briefly before looking back down at the pie. And for the first time since she had spoken at that table, I meant it in a different way than she understood. Because while they were planning what would happen next to me, I had just started planning what would happen next to them. And Mark Ellison was not the only person who still knew exactly how my affairs were structured. I did not linger in the kitchen long enough to invite more questions. I carried the pie back into the dining room, set it down at the center of the table, and began slicing it with the same steady hands I had used all morning. Cinnamon, sugar, the soft crack of the crust under the knife. Familiar things. Grounding things. Who wants a slice? I asked, as if nothing had shifted. A few hands raised hesitantly. Plates were passed. Forks moved again. The room filled with small, careful conversation, but it no longer held me the same way. I was listening for something else now, watching for the details. That did not belong. Rebecca reached for her phone at one point, glancing down quickly before setting it beside her plate again. The screen lit up just long enough for me to catch a name at the top of a message thread. Ethan. That meant nothing to anyone else at the table, but stayed with me. After dessert, people began to stand, chairs scraping softly against the hardwood. Coats were gathered, polite goodbyes exchanged, the kind that fill space without meaning much. Ruth hugged me a little longer than usual. Call me later, she whispered. I nodded once. My niece avoided my eyes as she slipped out the door. Within 15 minutes, the house was quieter. Only Daniel and Rebecca remained, moving slowly through the kitchen, stacking plates, rinsing glasses. I stood at the doorway for a moment, watching them. This used to be normal. Family cleaning up together after a meal. Now it felt like I was looking at something staged. You do not have to do that, I said finally. I could take care of it. Daniel shook his head. It is fine, Mom. We have it. Rebecca added, we will not be long. I stepped back, letting them continue, then turned down the hallway toward the study. The door was closed. That alone was unusual. I always left it slightly open. I reached for the handle and pushed it inward. The room looked the same at first glance. Desk against the wall, lamp angled just so, the framed photo of Robert on the corner. But when you know where to look, small things become clear. The chair was not pushed in all the way. The stack of envelopes on the left side of the desk had been shifted just slightly out of alignment. And the bottom drawer. I walked over slowly and pulled it open. Inside, the folders were still there. Tax returns. property deed, copies of the trust, but they were not arranged the way I had left them. The blue folder that should have been on top was now underneath a manila one. I lifted it carefully and opened it. The documents were intact, but the edges were not perfectly aligned anymore, as if someone had flipped through them quickly and closed them without care. I slid the folder back into place, then paused. There, tucked into the back corner of the drawer, was something I had not seen before. A business card, white, clean, with raised lettering. I picked it up and turned it over. Evergreen Realty Group. Beneath it, a name, Ethan Collins. The same name I'd seen on Rebecca's phone just minutes earlier. I held the card between my fingers, feeling its weight, its presence in a space where it did not belong unless someone had left it there intentionally or by mistake. Footsteps sounded faintly from the kitchen, the low murmur of Daniel's voice, Rebecca responding quietly. I closed the drawer gently, keeping the card in my hand. This was no longer about assumptions. This was evidence. A person, a contact, a connection that tied everything together in a way that could be traced, questioned, confirmed. I slipped the card into the pocket of my blouse and took a slow breath before stepping back into the hallway. When I returned to the kitchen, Rebecca was drying her hands with a towel, Daniel stacking the last of the plates. She looked up as I entered. "All set?" she asked. I gave a small nod. "Almost," I said. Then I met her eyes, just long enough to let the moment settle. I think it is time I speak with Ethan Collins myself. For the first time that day, her composure faltered, just slightly, and Daniel's hand stopped mid-motion above the counter. And in that brief pause between them, I realized something even more important than the card in my pocket. They had not expected me to know his name. I did not repeat his name. I did not need to. The silence that followed was enough. Rebecca was the first to recover, setting the dish towel down with a measured motion, as if she were placing something fragile back where it belonged. "If you want to speak with Ethan," she said, her tone smoothing out again, "we can arrange that. It might actually help clarify things." Clarify. Another careful word. Daniel glanced at her, then at me, and this time he did not look away. "He already has most of the information he needs," he added. "It would not take long to move forward if we decide to." If we decide, I'll let that phrase sit between us for a moment. Then I nodded slightly, as if considering it. "I would like that," I said. "Set up a time." Rebecca's expression shifted, not into relief, but into something closer to confirmation. She picked up her phone again, already unlocking it. "I will text him now," she said. "He has been expecting to hear from us." Expecting. That was new. I watched her thumbs move quickly across the screen, the faint tapping sound filling the quiet kitchen. Daniel leaned back against the counter, arms crossing loosely, his posture more settled than it had been earlier. The tension that had filled the room during brunch had not disappeared, but it had changed shape. They were no longer explaining. They were proceeding. "We actually took the next step already," Rebecca said after a moment, glancing up from her phone. "Just to keep things moving." I did not interrupt. I waited. She turned the screen slightly in my direction, not enough for me to read every word, but enough to show the subject line of an email draft. "Property listing preparation, Carter residence." My eyes moved from the phone to her face. "Preparation," I repeated quietly. She nodded. "Photography, staging consultation, preliminary listing materials," she said, listing them as if she were going over a checklist at work. "Nothing goes live without your approval, of course. But it saves time to have everything ready." Daniel added, "It is just being efficient, Mom. The market moves fast this time of year." Efficient. Fast. Ready. The language of people who believed the outcome was already decided. I stepped further into the kitchen, closing the distance between us by a few feet. Not aggressively, just enough to change the shape of the conversation. "And when were you planning to tell me about the photographer?" I asked. Rebecca did not hesitate this time. "He is available early next week," she said. "We thought Tuesday morning would work best. Good light, fewer shadows." Tuesday morning. I felt the timeline settle into place again. Appraisal 3 weeks ago. Financial review. Advisor. Now photography. Each step lined up neatly, one leading into the next, all of it moving forward whether I spoke or not. "I have a doctor's appointment Tuesday morning," I said. That was true. It was on the calendar in the kitchen. Rebecca's eyes flickered briefly toward Daniel, then back to me. We can work around that, she said. It would only take an hour. We have keys. We have keys. The words were simple, almost casual, but they landed differently now. Not permission, not access granted in trust. Ownership, or something close to it. Daniel shifted his weight, uncrossing his arms. Mom, we're trying to help, he said again, but the tone had changed. Less uncertain, more settled, as if he had already decided where he stood. I held his gaze for a moment, then looked back at Rebecca. You are moving very quickly, I said. She gave a small, controlled smile. Because waiting creates problems, she replied. We are just staying ahead of them. Ahead. That was the word that mattered. They believed they were ahead. Ahead of the market. Ahead of complications. Ahead of me. I nodded once more, as if accepting the logic of it. All right, I said. Let's not fall behind, then. Rebecca's smile widened slightly, satisfied. She picked up her phone again, likely sending another message, confirming another step. Daniel reached for a glass, filling it with water from the sink, the sound of it running steady and unbothered. I turned toward the hallway, my hand brushing lightly against the pocket where the business card rested, still there, still sharp against the fabric. Ethan Collins, Evergreen Realty Group. They were moving forward because they believed everything was already in motion, because they believed the structure they had built could not be undone. I paused at the edge of the kitchen and glanced back at them one more time. When you hear back from him, I said, let me know the exact time. Rebecca nodded without looking up from her phone. Of course, she said. I stepped into the hallway then, the house quieter again, but not the same quiet as before. This one carried intention, because if they were preparing to show my house to the world next week, then I needed to understand exactly what Ethan Collins thought he had been hired to sell. That afternoon, after Daniel and Rebecca left, I did not sit down. I did not rest. I walked straight back into the study and closed the door behind me, this time deliberately. The house felt different now, not empty, but exposed, as if something private had already been shared without my consent. I moved to the desk and pulled the bottom drawer open again, laying everything out one piece at a time. The trust documents, the property deed, the copies Robert had insisted we keep. Organized. I checked each page carefully, not just for what was missing, but for what might have been moved, photographed, or noted. Then I reached for my phone and opened the message thread with Mark Ellison. There was no reply yet. That was fine. I scrolled instead to another contact, one I had not needed in years but had never deleted. First National Bank, branch manager, Linda Harper. She had helped Robert and me set up our accounts decades ago. I pressed call. She answered on the third ring. This is Linda. Linda, this is Helen Carter, I said. There was a brief pause, then recognition warmed her tone. Helen, it has been a while. What can I do for you? I did not explain everything. I did not need to. I would like to review all recent access to my accounts, I said. Every inquiry, every authorization, everything within the last 6 months. Linda did not hesitate. Of course, she replied. We can pull that. Do you want it emailed or printed for pickup? Printed, I said. I will come by tomorrow morning. I will have it ready, she said. I ended the call and set the phone down, then turned back to the desk. The authorization form Rebecca had shown me earlier was still fresh in my mind. Associated documentation. That phrase had not been an accident. I opened the blue folder again and flipped through until I found the original trust summary Robert and I had signed years ago. The language was clear. No transfer of assets could occur without my direct authorization. Notarized, witnessed, and recorded. No informal planning. No preliminary steps that carried legal weight. Which meant everything they had done so far was built on access, not authority. Access they had stretched. Access they had assumed would go unchallenged. I closed the folder and sat down in the chair, finally allowing myself a moment of stillness. Not to think about what they had said, but to consider what they believed. They believed I would follow their pace, that I would react slowly, emotionally, maybe even gratefully, that I would let them guide the process because they had already moved it forward. I reached into my pocket and took out the business card again, placing it on the desk in front of me. Ethan Collins, Evergreen Realty Group, a name tied now to my house, my account, my life, without my permission. I picked up my phone once more and opened the browser, typing in the brokerage name. Within seconds, his profile appeared. Licensed agent. Local listings. Contact number. I did not call. Not yet. Instead, I wrote the number down on a notepad beside me, along with the date from the appraisal document and the Tuesday morning they had mentioned for photography. Then I added one more line beneath it. Be present. That was the difference now. They had been moving around me, timing things for when I was not there, when I was occupied, when I was expected to trust. That would not happen again. I stood up, walked to the closet, and pulled out the small lockbox Robert had installed years ago. Inside were duplicates of certain documents, ones we had agreed never to leave in the open. I checked them quickly. Everything was still in place. I closed the box, locked it, and set it back where it belonged. My phone buzzed softly on the desk. A new message. Mark Ellison. Ellen, I got your message. I am available tomorrow at 11. Bring everything you have. I read it once, then again, letting the timing settle into place. Tomorrow morning, the bank. 11 o'clock, Mark. Tuesday, the photographer. A sequence forming, but not the one Daniel and Rebecca had planned. I picked up the business card again, turning it once more between my fingers, then set it beside the notepad. For the first time since Easter brunch began, I was no longer reacting to what they had done. I was deciding what would happen next. And if Ethan Collins believed he was preparing to list my house next week, then the next conversation he had about that property was going to include me, whether he was expecting it or not. The next morning, I arrived at First National Bank 10 minutes before they opened. The parking lot was still half empty, the morning air cool, the kind that carries the faint smell of damp pavement and early coffee. I sat in my car for a moment, reviewing the list I had written the night before. Dates, names, questions. Then I stepped out, locked the door behind me, and walked inside as soon as the doors unlocked at 9. Linda was already waiting behind her desk when I approached. She stood as soon as she saw me. Helen, she said warmly, gesturing for me to sit. I pulled everything you asked for. She handed me a thick envelope, heavier than I expected. Inside were printed logs, neatly organized by date. Account access records, authorization entries, inquiry requests. I opened it carefully, flipping past the first few pages until something caught my eye. March 12th, the same date as the appraisal. There it was. External inquiry request, authorized access. I felt the shift immediately, not emotional but structural. I traced the line with my finger. The request had come from a financial services firm in Stanford, the same city Rebecca had mentioned the day before. Linda, I said, keeping my voice even, this authorization does allow someone to view account balances? She nodded. Yes, but only if it is signed by you or someone with legal authority. I turned the page, scanning further down. There was a reference number tied to the authorization form. The same form Rebecca had shown me. The same signature. My signature. In this firm, I continued, tapping the name printed on the page. They have already accessed my information. Linda hesitated just briefly. They have made multiple inquiries, she said, within the scope of that authorization. Multiple. Not one. Not preliminary. Repeated access. I closed the envelope slowly and rested it on the desk. I would like to revoke all third-party access immediately, I said. Linda did not question it. She reached for her keyboard. I can process that right now, she replied. It will take effect immediately. Any future requests will be denied. I nodded. Do it. As she typed, the sound of the keys filled the quiet office, steady, precise. A small but decisive shift. Not visible to Daniel or Rebecca. Not yet. When she finished, she printed a confirmation and slid it across the desk toward me. You're all set, she said. No one outside your direct authorization can access anything moving forward. I took the paper and placed it inside my bag. Thank you, I said. Then I paused. One more thing. Can you print a full summary of all accounts as of today? Linda smiled slightly. Already included, she said, tapping the envelope. I thought you might want that. I stood, shaking her hand briefly before leaving. By the time I stepped back outside, the sun had risen higher, casting sharp light across the parking lot. I checked the time. 10:12 a.m. I had just under an hour before meeting Mark. I drove straight there, the envelope resting on the passenger seat beside me. Every page incited a record of what had already been done without my knowledge. Mark Ellison's office was on the second floor of a brick building downtown, the kind with narrow hallways and quiet doors. He greeted me at the entrance to his office, his expression serious the moment he saw my face. "Helen," he said, closing the door behind me. "Let's take a look." I laid everything out on his desk. The authorization form, the appraisal details, the bank records, the business card. He reviewed each piece carefully, not rushing, not reacting outwardly. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. "They have been thorough," he said, "but they have not crossed the legal line. Not yet. Not yet." I held on to that. "What happens if they try to move forward?" I asked. Mark's expression sharpened slightly. "Then we stop them," he said. "But timing matters. If you confront them too early, they will adjust. If you wait until they commit to an action that requires your legal consent, that is where you have full control." Control. That was the word that settled everything into place. I reached into my bag and pulled out the confirmation from the bank, placing it on the desk beside the other documents. "I have already limited their access," I said. Mark nodded once, approving. "Good. That forces them to rely on what they think they already have." I thought about Tuesday morning. The photographer, the staging, the assumption that everything was moving forward. "They're expecting to prepare the house for listing next week," I said. Mark leaned forward slightly. "Then let them prepare," he replied. "But make sure you are present when they do." I nodded slowly, feeling the shape of the plan settle into something clear, something deliberate. "And the realtor?" I asked. Mark glanced at the business card. "You should speak with him directly," he said. "Find out exactly what he believes his authority is." I picked up the card again, turning it once between my fingers. Ethan Collins, Evergreen Realty Group. The name that had moved quietly through my house, my accounts, my life. I stood, gathering the documents back into the envelope. "I will call him," I said. Mark watched me for a moment, then nodded. "Do not reveal everything yet," he added. "Let him tell you what he thinks he is doing." I understood. Information first. Reaction later. I stepped out of his office and into the hallway, the quiet echo of my footsteps following me down the stairs. Outside, the afternoon light had settled in, steady and bright. I reached into my bag, pulled out my phone, and looked down at the number I had written the night before. My finger hovered over it for just a second before pressing call. The line rang once, twice. Then a voice answered, confident, professional. "This is Ethan Collins." I paused just long enough to let him hear the silence on my end. Then I said, "Mr. Collins, this is Helen Carter. I believe you have been preparing to sell my house." In the space that followed, I was about to find out exactly how far they had gone without me. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, not long enough to be silence, but long enough to register surprise. Then his voice returned, still professional, but tighter. "Mrs. Carter," Ethan said, "I was under the impression I would be speaking with your son." I let that sit for half a second. "You are speaking with the homeowner," I replied. "So let us start there." Another pause, this one longer. I could almost hear him recalibrating. "Of course," he said finally. "I apologize. I have been coordinating primarily with Daniel and Rebecca. They indicated they were assisting you with the sale." Assisting. I walked slowly toward the window as he spoke, watching the quiet street below Mark's office, cars moving in steady lines, ordinary life continuing as if nothing had shifted. "And what exactly have they authorized you to do?" I asked. Ethan cleared his throat lightly. Papers shuffled on his end. "We completed a comparative market analysis, as you have likely seen," he said. "We also discussed listing strategy, potential pricing, and preliminary staging recommendations. I have a photographer tentatively scheduled for Tuesday morning." Tentatively, I repeated, "Yes," pending final confirmation. I turned slightly, leaning my shoulder against the wall, grounding myself in the moment. "And what documentation do you have that gives you authority to proceed with any of that?" This time, the hesitation was unmistakable, not uncertainty, caution. "We were provided with an authorization form," he said carefully. It indicated that financial review and planning access had been granted. Financial review is not property transfer, I said. My tone remained even, but there was no room left in it now. Do you have a signed listing agreement with me? No, he admitted. That was the first clear line. The first point that could not be redirected or softened. Do you have any document, signed by me, that authorizes you to market, photograph, or prepare my home for sale? I continued. No, ma'am, he said again. I closed my eyes for just a moment, not in frustration, but in recognition. There it was, the boundary. Everything they had built rested just short of it. Then let me be very clear, I said, opening my eyes again. You do not have my permission to enter my property, to schedule photography, or to prepare any listing materials. Not now, not Tuesday, not at any time unless I say so directly. Ethan did not argue. His voice shifted, aligning itself with the reality of the situation. Understood, he said. Without your authorization, we cannot proceed. Cannot. Now not. Cannot. That mattered. I would also like confirmation in writing, I added, that no listing process has been initiated and no further action will be taken without my direct consent. I can send that immediately, he replied. You will have it within the hour. I nodded, even though he could not see me. Good, I said. Then I paused, just long enough to let the next question land with weight. One more thing, Mr. Collins. When Daniel and Rebecca contacted you, what did they tell you about my involvement in this process? This time, the silence stretched, longer than before. They indicated, he said slowly, choosing each word, that you were aware of the plan and prefer that they handle the initial steps on your behalf. Preferred. I let out a quiet breath, not a surprise, but of confirmation. That is not accurate, I said. I had no knowledge of your involvement until yesterday. There was no hesitation now. Understood, he said. Thank you for clarifying. I ended the call a moment later, lowering the phone slowly into my hand. The hallway around me felt different now. Not quieter, sharper, defined. I stepped outside, into the afternoon light, the envelope still tucked under my arm. The business card no longer just a clue, but a connection that had just been confirmed. They had not just planned without me. They had spoken for me, represented me, moved forward as if my voice had already been given. I walked to my car and sat down, placing the phone on the seat beside me. Within minutes, an email notification appeared. I opened it immediately. Evergreen Realty Group. A formal statement. No listing agreement. No wusedisastion. No action to proceed. Clear. Direct. In writing. I read it once, then saved it. This was no longer assumption. No longer interpretation. It was documented. Verified. Irrefutable. I started the car, the engine turning over smoothly beneath my hands. Daniel and Rebecca believed they were moving ahead. That Tuesday morning would unfold exactly as they planned. The photographer would arrive. The house would be prepared. The process would continue. I placed the phone back into my bag and looked straight ahead through the windshield. Because now, when Tuesday came, they were not going to walk into a house they controlled. They were going to walk into a moment they had not prepared for. Tuesday morning arrived exactly as they had planned, but not the way they expected. I was already in the living room when the doorbell rang at 9:02 a.m., dressed, composed, but not calm in the way they were used to seeing me. There was something sharper underneath now, something that had been building since Easter brunch and had no intention of staying quiet any longer. I opened the door myself. A man stood there with a camera bag slung over his shoulder, polite professional. Good morning, he said. I'm here for the property shoot. Behind him, I saw Daniel's car pulling into the driveway, Rebecca in the passenger seat. The timing was precise, coordinated. Of course it was. You will not be photographing anything today, I said, my voice firm, leaving no room for interpretation. The man blinked, caught off guard. I was scheduled. You were scheduled by people who do not have the authority to do that. I cut in, not shouting, but not soft either. Just clear, direct. He hesitated, then nodded slowly. Understood, he said. I will step back. He took a step away from the door, just as Daniel and Rebecca walked up. The path, their expressions shifting the moment they saw him standing there instead of inside. What is going on? Rebecca asked, her tone already tightening. I stepped fully into the doorway, placing myself between them and the house. "What is going on?" I repeated. "Is it this stops today?" Daniel frowned, looking from me to the photographer and back again. "Mom, we talked about this," he said. "We are just preparing. You are not preparing anything." I snapped, the words coming faster now, sharper, because the restraint I had held onto for days was no longer necessary. "You scheduled people into my house. You contacted professionals using my name. You accessed my accounts without telling me. And you expected me to just what? Sit here and let it happen." Rebecca stepped forward, her composure cracking for the first time in a way that was no longer controlled. "We were trying to help you," she said, her voice rising. "You cannot manage all of this on your own forever. That is not your decision to make." I shot back, louder now, the force of it surprising even me. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone, opening the email from Ethan Collins. I held it up, not for effect, but because it mattered. "I spoke with your realtor," I said. "There is no listing agreement. No lucidisation. Nothing signed by me that gives either of you the right to do any of this." Daniel's face went still. Not confused, not defensive. Still. Rebecca's eyes flickered to the phone, then back to me. "We had the authorization form," she said, but the certainty in her voice had shifted. "For financial review." I cut in. "Not for selling my home. Not for letting strangers walk through my house. Not for speaking on my behalf." The photographer shifted awkwardly behind them, clearly wishing he was anywhere else. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, pacing once across the small section of walkway. "Mom, you are overreacting," he said finally, but the words lacked the confidence they had carried before. That was the moment it broke open. "Overreacting." I stepped forward, closing the distance now, not physically threatening, but no longer holding back. "You went into my study while I was gone. You went through my documents. You contacted a realtor. You set a timeline to sell my house and move me out. Within 90 days, and you did all of it without telling me. And you think I am overreacting?" My voice rose on the last word. Not uncontrolled, but undeniable. Ruth's words from Sunday echoed in my mind. I thought you had agreed. They had not just planned. They had rewritten reality around me. Rebecca opened her mouth to respond, then stopped. For the first time, she did not have a clean answer. Daniel looked at her, then back at me, and I saw it clearly now. Not just guilt, not just defensiveness. Uncertainty. Real, unmistakable uncertainty. The photographer cleared his throat quietly. "I'm going to head out," he said, already stepping back toward his car. No one stopped him. I lowered my phone slowly, my chest rising and falling faster now, the adrenaline of it all catching up at once. "This ends here," I said, quieter but no less firm. "No more appointments. No more calls. No more decisions about my life without me." Rebecca's jaw tightened, her control slipping just enough to show the edge beneath it. "You cannot just shut this down," she said. "We have already put things in motion." I met her eyes, holding them this time. "No," I said. "You thought you did." Daniel looked between us again, the space between certainty and consequence widening in front of him. And in that moment, standing in my own doorway, I realized something neither of them had fully understood yet. They had started something they could not finish. And now, they were about to find out what it actually meant to try and take control of something that was never theirs. Daniel did not argue after that. Not immediately. He stood there in the driveway, looking at the house, then at me, then at Rebecca, as if something had finally come into focus that he could no longer ignore. Rebecca, on the other hand, did not step back. She took one step forward instead, her voice sharper now, stripped of the polished tone she had carried all week. "You are making a mistake," she said. "You are throwing away the chance to handle this cleanly." I let out a short breath, not a laugh, but something close to it. "Cleanly," I repeated. "You went behind my back, used my name, accessed my accounts, and tried to sell my house while I was still living in it. There is nothing clean about that." Daniel finally spoke again, but this time his voice was quieter, uncertain. "Rebecca, maybe we pushed this too far," he said. She turned on him immediately. "We did what needed to be done," she snapped. "Or were you planning to wait until it was too late and everything became a mess?" That word again. Mess. I stepped aside then, just slightly, and opened the front door wider. You should both come inside, I said. Not an invitation. A directive. They hesitated, then walked in, slower now, the certainty from earlier replaced by something heavier. I closed the door behind them and led the way to the living room. The folders from Sunday were still on the table where they had left them. I picked one up and placed it directly in front of Rebecca. Read the first page, I said. She did not move at first. Then, slowly she opened it. Daniel leaned in beside her. Out loud, I added. Her jaw tightened, but she complied. Preliminary estate allocation plan. No, I interrupted. The document underneath it. She froze for a second, then flipped the page. Her eyes scanned the text, and I watched the exact moment her expression changed. The controls slipped. Just enough. What is this? She asked, her voice no longer steady. That, I said, reaching into my bag and pulling out a second set of papers, is the updated trust amendment my husband and I signed 3 years before he passed. I placed it on the table beside her folder. And you should keep reading. Daniel took the paper from her hands, his eyes moving quickly across the page. This says any unauthorized attempt to access, manage, or redistribute assets without the primary holder's consent results in immediate removal from beneficiary status. His voice slowed as he reached the last line. Effective immediately upon verification. Rebecca looked up at me, her composure gone now. That is not enforceable, she said, but there was no conviction behind it. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. It already has been, I said. I reached for my phone again and opened another document, this one sent by Mark less than an hour earlier. As of this morning, both of you have been formally removed from my estate plan, I continued. An illegal notice has been filed documenting unauthorized access to my financial records. Daniel stepped back slightly, as if the air in the room had changed. Mom, you cannot be serious, he said. I met his eyes, holding them steady. I am completely serious. Rebecca stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. You are overreacting and making this worse than it needs to be, she said, her voice rising again, but now it carried something else. Panic. No, I replied just as firmly. You made it worse when you decided you could act without me. Daniel looked between us again, but this time there was no middle ground left to stand on. What does that mean? He asked, his voice quieter now. It means, I said, that you no longer have any claim to this house, these accounts, or anything connected to them. Not now. Not later. The words settled into the room with a finality that could not be undone. Rebecca shook her head, pacing once, then turning back toward me. You cannot just cut us out like that, she said. We are family. I held her gaze, steady, unshaken. Family does not take what is not theirs, I said, and they certainly do not try to erase the person who built it. Daniel lowered himself into the chair slowly, his hands resting on his knees, his posture collapsing under the weight of what had just happened. Rebecca stood still now, no longer pacing, no longer speaking. The room had gone quiet again, but this time it was not uncertain. It was final. I walked to the front door and opened it once more, stepping aside. You should go, I said. Neither of them moved at first. Then Daniel stood, slowly, his eyes lingering on me for a moment longer before he turned toward the door. Rebecca followed, her expression tight, controlled again, but no longer in charge. They stepped out onto the driveway, the same place where this had all begun just days ago, but nothing about it felt the same now. I closed the door behind them and turned the lock, the sound of it clicking into place sharper than anything else that had happened that day. The house fell quiet around me, but this time it was not empty or exposed. It was mine, completely. And for the first time since they had started making plans without me, there was nothing left for them to take.